G'day guys, Tony Angus back again with some more information on managing conflict and aggression. And last time we were together, we looked at the model of escalation. I gave you a little bit of history and we fired up the model by kick-starting the discussion with this understanding that conflict and aggression normally kicks off with some sort of disagreement. And that you can prevent some of that disagreement by providing your customers and clients, your passengers, your students, your patrons, some understanding of their situation and some control over their situation. And I referred you to a Telling It Like It Is post where I talk about modifying behaviours, modifying your own behaviours and helping to modify the behaviours of others. So I wanted to progress on with this idea. We discussed as well that conflict begins with some disagreement, but some people don't escalate as much as others. And so quite possibly that has to do with the fact that they have more coping skills than other people. That if you simply have bad set of coping skills and you come across a disagreement, you might escalate more in that moment. Understand as well, your coping fluctuates from day to day. You might wake up in a cranky mood or something happens over the course of the day. It also has to do with your stress management levels, blood sugar, how tired you are, how stressed, etc. And that will affect your coping on a day-to-day basis and quite often an hour-by-hour basis. If you're not, for example, eating well, then your blood sugar is going to spike, peak and trough and peak and trough. And in those troughs, you might be worse behaved than you are in the peaks. And so you go through a little series of sort of manic depressive moments. So let's just kickstart with what I ended last time with was, all right, someone's got a disagreement, but we can agree to disagree. We can be philosophical about it and say, oh, well, that's life. So why is it then do some people escalate? Well, coping is one part, but we need to know what's going on for the person so that we can provide the right strategy to manage the aggression. And there are three categories that I want to give you. Three categories of aggression that we're going to look at. Three categories of escalation. All right? So I'll write these down and I'll be back with you in a tick. Rightio, the first category that you need to know about is loss. Loss-related aggression. Now this is massive and it's such a huge topic to talk about. And it's massive because anybody can become aggressive because of some form of loss. This is commonplace. So, what am I talking about? I'm talking about the guy or girl waiting at public transport for a train that's going to be very late, thereby missing an appointment. I'm talking about you sitting in a waiting room for hours and not knowing what's going on. I'm talking about your suddenly being told that you have a massive bill to pay and not being able to pay your other bills. Or missing out on a work agreement and so you don't get your bonus at Christmas time. I'm talking about an argument. I'm talking about where somebody has put you down and insulted you and you feel some loss around that, the loss of ego. I'm talking about the loss of a family member. There are a number of losses that impact upon us harder than others. Okay, so one of those might be financial. Typically people escalate quite a lot when there's a financial loss involved. And the second is anything to do with family members, loved ones. A loss of a loved one typically brings out in us really strong behaviours. Now imagine if that is some loss of your child. And I've done courses, I've run plenty of programs for schools over the journey. And parents typically get quite fired up about their children being disadvantaged or bullied or in some way badly negatively affected. And it brings out the worst in these parents because they're obviously going into an incredible protective mode over their children, which we all understand. And again, I want to talk to you about degrees because there are large responses to loss where people fly off the handle and there are small responses. So the difference in loss would be you in a car, not really needing to get anywhere, just cruising, and you come across someone going really slow in front of you, but you've got nowhere to be, so you sort of wave your arms and you go, oh well, this guy's out for a joyride. But if you've got somewhere to be and someone's in front of you and they're not going the speed limit, and maybe they're in the overtaking lane or the fast lane, whatever you call it in your region, now you start waving your hands and tooting your horn and get out of my way. I've got places to go. And so there's a loss-related aggression there. The only reason is you're losing time, or you're not going to be somewhere on time. You'll be late for an appointment, or you'll miss the start of a movie, or whatever it is, but you're going to lose here. Now, it's only a small loss, so it's not like you're going to get out and hopefully axe murder the person. Not that I recommend you do that on any loss situation. However, the loss is only of time. And so typically the response we get is one of annoyance and all of the accompanying responses that we get when we feel annoyed. So we need to understand loss, and in order to understand loss, you've got to understand the mechanisms within the brain, the way the brain works, and what's going on there. If you have a look at this piece of paper, and I've printed out just a breakdown of the three main regions of the brain. In the yellow is our neocortex. Then in the orange is what's called the limbic system. And this is your subconscious, emotional, mammal brain. And you need to understand these three things. Subconscious, emotional. So this is where emotion is created, in that orange region there. And so I don't want to get too heavily into emotion, because emotion is created both in the neocortex and the limbic system, and quite often they talk to each other to create emotion. But this is sort of that instinctive emotion we were talking about. And then of course there's your cerebellum, your brainstem, and the midbrain in there. And this is the reptile brain, okay? So I'll stick this up on the board here. It's really important that you become familiar with the brain and the way that works in this topic, because understanding how the brain works is going to help us to understand why people are aggressive, and then how to best manage that aggression. So what happens is you suffer some sort of loss. Now, loss is then going to alert the amygdala within the subconscious brain. Okay, so I'll write down in here, amygdala. The amygdala is a little gland that sits within your limbic system, and it communicates with other glands in the limbic system, such as the hippocampus and the thalamus, etc. And they work out, are they safe? The amygdala then, if it says we're not safe here, the amygdala is the thing that kickstarts a response called fight or flight. So if there's a loss, you typically get then a fight or flight response. So the amygdala equals fight or flight, or freeze. Maybe your system just doesn't know what to do and you end up frozen, which is the third response. Again, I don't want to get too heavily into this, but fight or flight are different parts of the nervous system. So the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. Sympathetic meaning to raise your level of arousal, and the parasympathetic to lower your level of arousal for sleep, etc. And then there's some sort of discussion goes between the two, and maybe it chooses to freeze because it doesn't know what else to do. So there's a bit of an argument that takes place. There's a lot of controversy around this part, but maybe the subconscious mind is saying, I think the best thing to do right now is to do nothing, so I'm just going to freeze and stay stock still. You're in front of a grizzly bear, for example. The best thing to do is lie down and play dead. So, the amygdala gets the idea in discussions with other parts of the brain that we're in trouble here and we're going to suffer some sort of loss. And so it initiates a fight or flight. It sends a message down the spinal cord, spinal column, to the adrenal glands which sit on your kidneys. And then they release adrenaline. So your fight or flight response is going to instigate an adrenaline response. And we know what adrenaline does. Adrenaline courses through the body and it creates massive change in our system. It, for example, gets the heart rate going harder. Your vision will tunnel and your auditory faculty will exclude extraneous noise, peripheral noise, and you'll hear mostly where the threat's coming from and not much of anything else. Your heart beats harder, your lungs expand to take in more oxygen, your liver releases glucose into the system, and the body takes the blood away from the organs, such as the stomach, and it pushes that extra glucose enriched, extra oxygenated blood, pushes that into the external muscles for fighting or fleeing, to give you power in those muscles to fight or combat physically the threat or to run away from that threat. So that's your fight or flight response. So what's happening in conflict situations is that the blood flow and electrical activity gets pushed out of the neocortex, the human brain, and into the mammal brain of the limbic system. And this means that the mammal brain is the emotional brain, and you're moving away from the rational, analytical mind, which is your neocortex. So I'll write in here mammalian brain. So that's your mammal brain or mammalian brain. So if this is your mammalian brain, with loss behaviour, what we call this behaviour is gorilla behaviour. So I'm going to write gorilla down here. Because typically what you see then, and next stage, is to witness what unfolds with a loss-related disagreement. So a loss-related disagreement causing gorilla behaviour manifests as a massive change in body language. So the body will, as I described earlier, fill with blood. People will huff and puff and pace around. Lots of movement, lots of big gestures. So typically the arms will come up above the waist. So you'll see, to begin with, maybe hands on hips. And then bigger gestures, broader gestures. Lots of jerky, thrusting movements. Not a lot of delicacy and finesse going on. So if they've got something in their hand, typically that thing will be thrust down to the floor. Doors are slammed. A lot of stomping around. There's also a lot of accompanying facial expression. Okay, so the face makes its typical facial construct, so it's typical expressions such as gritted teeth and furrowed brow, knitted, tense, the neck's tense, the shoulders tense, a lot of angry eyes and looking around aggressively. A lot of that pinched, very angry look. Flushed face, possibly sweating. And so that's a fight or flight physical response. Now you can break that down into earlier components. And what I recommend you do is have a look at how it escalates. So start down low. You might just see some shifting in the seat. If a person is in a waiting room and they're getting a little agitated, you might see some sort of this sort of thing just lets you know that there's beginning stages of escalating behaviour here. The person's becoming frustrated with their circumstances and physically they're letting you know. The next stage that you'll see and typically witness is some sort of verbal expression of discontent. Okay, and once again, you might see little or hear little expressions that let you know someone's starting to escalate before they use words. So a lot of the body language is accompanied by huffing and sighing and tisking and coughing. That sort of, oh God. That sort of thing. They might mutter themselves or talk to God. You get a lot of this sort of, typically, and then you might hear some changes in their verbals. Their verbals, when they start using words, will be strained. Quite often a little bit base language, so you might get a little bit less sophisticated, certainly, less sophisticated and possibly more swear words, certainly more base language, more monosyllabic, one syllable words, and a little bit more abrupt. So that's the type of verbals that you're expecting at that stage. But don't forget, before it reaches its peak, it might simply be some low-level sarcasm. It might be simply like, oh, that'd be right. How typical is this? That sort of thing. They might start saying things like, so questioning you, well, why? Why does this always happen? Every time I catch your train, you're late. We're paying you, why don't you do anything about it? Now, as they get more agitated, they might start challenging you. Seriously, what do we pay you people for? Why does everybody here have to pay you? Why do I pay you anything to ride a train when you can't get there on time? And so you can see this very agitated, very aggressive, very abrupt, sarcastic, questioning language. If it becomes challenging, so you've got sarcasm, got some questioning, if it starts to become challenging, like well, no, I'm not going to do what you ask. Why would I do it? What good are you? You might find they venture into insults and abuse. Well, I don't even know what are you doing here? Are you of any use to me? What do you stand? Go and do something else. If that venturing into that challenging thing, it's almost like dipping their toe in the water. What does this feel like? Beyond that, they might start insulting and abusing, calling you names. If they take a step forward and threaten you, come anywhere closer, mate, and I swear I'll smash you. You get any of that language? They've escalated fully. In fact, they're moving into the next stages. So just be very conscious of that. But try and pick it up in the early stages. Why? Because it's easier to deal with a firecracker than with a nuclear bomb. If you can catch them in the early stages of escalation, go back, provide them some understanding and control, give them some information, give them something to fill out as if they're on to their next stage. We're getting close now, you're on your next stage. If you can go in there and reassure them, offer them a cup of water, whatever you're going to do, I don't know what work environment you're working in, so this is not going to be appropriate for everyone. But there will be something you can do to help. And if you can pick this up in the early stages, it's very worthwhile. Conflict management is about this stage. It's what you do right now. And I encourage you to understand, conflict management is not about having this line turn back down. It's not about that. If you can keep them there, people will stay there and won't escalate depending on your involvement now. And if they just hover around that, if that line levels off here, we're fine with that. Okay? So don't try and have them lower back down and become all placid. That's not likely. So your conflict management is about what we do now. And the next time we're together, I want to talk to you about how we're going to think about the gorilla, how you're going to deal with the gorilla, the most appropriate strategies. All right? So, as always, thanks for having me in your homes and in your workplaces. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you. and I appreciate your subscription. So push on me head there. Either move your mouse around, put your cursor on there and subscribe to the channel. You have to be signed in with YouTube, but that's free and easy. Takes you 5 seconds. So subscribe by clicking on the button and leave comments for me to work on. If there's something else you'd like to hear, something you'd like me to talk about, I'm happy to do that. For now, think about your own situations when you're having your limbic system kicking into gear and you may be feeling some sort of loss, all right? And think about what you might appreciate from me if I was to respond to you. Righto guys, have a safe day.